Welcome to the Camp Edwards Multi-Purpose Qualification Range Update. In response to a great deal of public interest and questions, and during a time of COVID-19, the Massachusetts Army National Guard felt that the best and safest method of distributing important information regarding this range project would be through a comprehensive television program. As many of you know, Joint Base Cape Cod is home to multiple military services and federal agencies, including Army, Air Force, Space Force, Coast Guard, and the Department of Agriculture. In this program, we'll be focusing on the location of Camp Edwards on Joint Base Cape Cod. In 1937, Camp Edwards was dedicated as a training site for the famous World War I 26th Yankee Division. The site was named after the heroic commander of the 26th Yankee Division, Major General Clarence R. Edwards. The training site transitioned into a mobilization site in 1941 for World War II and again in 1950 for the mobilization of the Korean War. From 1968, the Air National Guard and the Coast Guard moved to the base. Today, Camp Edwards continues to support critical pre-mobilization training of the Massachusetts National Guard. Since 2002, Massachusetts National Guard soldiers and airmen have deployed to the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Horn of Africa, Eastern Europe, and South America. These men and women who selflessly serve the Commonwealth and our nation rely on Camp Edwards and deserve the best and most modern ranges, training areas, and support facilities, so they can do their job and safely come home to their families. During this program, you will hear from several Camp Edwards team members who have devoted an enormous amount of time and effort towards this project, ensuring that Camp Edwards is compliant under Chapter 47 and that the drinking water and the habitat are protected. You will hear from several members of the Army National Guard who will tell you in their own voice why this multi-purpose qualification range is so important to them. Since 2012, the Massachusetts National Guard has spoken of this machine gun range project at several public meetings that were widely advertised. Additionally, I personally spoke of this military construction project at the 2018 and 2019 Joint Base Cape Cod brief to the Board of Selectmen for the towns of Bourne, Falmouth, Barnstable, and Sandwich. In 2019, Camp Edwards went so far as hosting 3 public meetings at the Camp Edwards Training Support Center, where those who attended had a chance to see a simulated machine gun qualification and fire simulated machine guns. In the months of August and September, we asked for public comment over a 30-day period in accordance with the National Environmental Protection Act. We have received many public questions and concerns regarding this range project, and we have grouped these questions and concerns into several focus points, such as range location, habitat impact, noise, water and soil quality, and traffic. I sincerely hope that you find this program informative and that it addresses your important questions and concerns. The Camp Edwards team not only works on the base, but many of us live in your communities, our children attend your schools, we drink the water, enjoy the wildlife, and work and recreate on the soils. Please know what happens on Camp Edwards is important to all of us.
Camp Edwards is the largest National Guard training site in New England and the only training site in Massachusetts that can support this type of range. It will enable soldiers to accomplish multiple tasks in a single drill weekend. KD Range was selected as the site of the MPMG after a comprehensive analysis was conducted of all 16 sites where ranges are currently located. This analysis included environmental input, geographical analysis, and safety reviews. After the analysis was completed, KD Range was selected as the #1 location in the training area as it minimizes the impact to the environment, the topography requires minimal modification, and meets Army safety requirements. There are plans for the development of 2 out of the 4 standard 1,500-meter lanes in the future to meet the training needs of the Massachusetts Army National Guard. This plan was included in part of the submittal in the environmental review documents. Additionally, lessons learned from other ranges built on the installation were taken into account during the design process. The increase in range usage will increase traffic overall. However, the impacts are not projected to be significant as the training will be spread out across the training year. Additionally, units try to convoy during non-peak traffic hours. Also, vehicles would travel directly to Camp Edwards and back to their armory and not in and around town. Lastly, multiple units that use this range either have their armories on Camp Edwards or keep and maintain their vehicles on Camp Edwards, which further reduces the impact on Cape Cod traffic.
So the Massachusetts Army National Guard actually has its own natural resources conservation and land management program. We work very closely with Mass Wildlife and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to develop long-term conservation management plans. DoD conservation across the country has a great track record, but also here at Camp Edwards for rare species recovery, environmental management, and overall ensuring that we have a healthy ecosystem that also supports Army training. And that is fundamental to what our program does, and we're very proud of our successes working in interagency partnerships throughout the region and on the ground conservation. We're all very proud to both work and live in these southeastern Massachusetts pine barrens that can thrive with Army training through our conservation work. Camp Edwards is actually synonymous roughly with the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve. It's a mandate of that groundwater reserve that we prioritize wildlife habitat and water quality and provide compatible military training with that habitat and water quality. We focus a lot of energy on planning sound conservation projects, putting that conservation on the ground, and then evaluating the effects of both our conservation projects and the Army training on the landscape through wildlife and plant monitoring or research projects and related actions. Our long-term bird surveys actually show that many species are thriving at Camp Edwards despite having regional and even range-wide declines in their population, some nearing towards extinction. We've seen for species such as the eastern whippoorwill or the brown thrasher or the grasshopper sparrow that even though they're declining severely throughout the Northeast, they're doing very well on Camp Edwards, and that our conservation actions and even the Army training is helping support those species. Likewise, our bird and moth surveys show that our ranges are biodiversity hotspots, which is counterintuitive to most people, but it's true throughout the country on Army bases that these ranges provide some of the best quality habitat around. And that's because so many of our rare species are actually dependent on earlier forest structure, younger forest structure. And these range areas can provide that. They provide edge habitat for species that are lost when forest canopy closes in and things get too shaded out, or species like quail and box turtles that need more of a mix of habitat. These range edges provide that. But also we have much more conservation and land management surrounding our ranges just out of necessity. So it provides some of the best blueberry barrens and grasslands and other habitats surrounding these ranges. And so we find that our rare species actually are doing better than anywhere else around at these ranges, which really highlights how Army training not only is compatible with wildlife habitat, but generally supports it, and our conservation work does as well. For species such as the eastern whippoorwill, the eastern box turtle, the Barron's buck moth, and the New England cottontail, the areas surrounding our ranges at Camp Edwards are the best spots in the Commonwealth, our monitoring shows, for those species. So really the Army bases and our management are doing an excellent job of conserving these rare species. So Camp Edwards is dominated by an Atlantic coastal pine barrens system, which is actually a globally rare natural community. So it's predominant in New Jersey, Long Island, and southeastern Massachusetts, and it's declining through particularly residential development. We manage for a mosaic of habitats from open sandplain grasslands that support upland sandpipers to mature oak forest thick with scarlet tanagers, but our flagship habitat is really the pine barrens, and that's our regional conservation focus, and our site conservation focus is sustaining this globally rare ecosystem. The pine barrens are what's called an early successional habitat, so it's dependent on disturbance. It's not an old growth forest characteristic. It requires fire and management. It evolved with fire through the millennia, and then it was sustained in southeastern Massachusetts through colonial land clearing, and then at Camp Edwards was sustained through actually military training starting in World War II and beyond. And now we have those same fire and forestry managed through conservation to sustain the pine barrens here. We've worked over several years actually with Mass Wildlife in particular and other partners to develop a very robust mitigation plan based particularly on habitat restoration to offset the potential effects of the range development. We were required through the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act to demonstrate net benefit for rare species in the habitat, and through that the overall ecosystem with this conservation plan. We had to show that we were providing for an overall ecosystem improvement despite the loss of habitat for the range development. As I said, it's on a foundation of habitat restoration, so we've already restored 699 acres of pine barrens habitat over the last 2 years and 150 acres of sandplain grassland habitat funded specifically as mitigation for the new range development project. This is a level of implementation that would have been inaccessible without this conservation mitigation plan, and it's only possible because of the DoD conservation structure and these partnerships and proactive planning that we've developed. We've also, specifically for this range project, transferred 260 acres of Joint Base Cape Cod through the Special Military Reserve Commission to Mass Wildlife that expands Crane Wildlife Management Area, where they're doing very similar monitoring and habitat management for pine barrens and grassland restoration. We can't provide for overall climate resilience or safe communities without implementing significant conservation management, and particularly wildland fire and forestry. So we know through modeling and through elsewhere in the country that wildfire risk is going to be increasing substantially, particularly in areas such as the pine barrens, which are highly flammable. Additionally, we already see significant stressors increasing, such as drought, storms, and forest pests. If we take a hands-off approach, such as just allowing these overdense, crowded forests to develop in an unhealthy state, then we aren't only going to lose our pine barrens and the rare species dependent upon them, but we're going to increase the risk to our communities through primary and secondary climate change effects. So really, it's incumbent upon us to have that long-term holistic planning that provides for conservation management, which also increases our carbon capture and provides for safer communities. We are very lucky and proud of the fact that this base is in a pine barrens ecosystem, which is dependent upon sound conservation management and well-guided disturbance, such as forestry and wildland fire, and that can thrive in concert with Army training, and that Army training can be so supportive of a healthy ecosystem, and it is compatible with that wildlife habitat and water quality as the primary drivers of the groundwater reserve and primary drivers of our conservation management. So we've developed this robust conservation plan to provide for overall ecosystem health, to provide for improved climate resiliency, and to provide for a healthy pine barren system that we can be proud of our role in conserving.
So the Massachusetts Army National Guard took a two-phase approach with respect to noise and the proposed project. Phase one obviously being the construction phase, and phase two being the operation or use of the range itself. The operational noise evaluation began about 5 years ago. The United States Army uses a software program to predict noise contours and how noise may propagate within the local environment as well as off-post. What we did was, in August of 2015, we reached out to Army Public Health Center to see if they could come out and conduct a on-site noise assessment to determine how accurate that data was. We set up with working through the United States EPA, Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, and the Environmental Management Commission, we decided that we would set up a mock firing line and berm, and to conduct that same type of training that this range would expect to see. What we found was, through that study, was that the information obtained is very accurate. The modeling data and the on-site data seem to marry up quite nicely. What we did identify was that there was some additional off-post noise. We went back to the drawing board and did a redesign and relocation, and we moved the range approximately 100 meters north. Basically, that's the furthest we could move it in the footprint provided. In doing so, we reduced the amount of off-post noise. As a result, the Mass Guard is committed to the recommendations not only from the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection as well as the US EPA and our own study completed by Army Public Health Center to conduct additional studies once the range has been constructed and is in operation. And that would allow us to consider potential future noise mitigation that would be required. Also, committed to standing up and implementing a noise complaint and notification hotline to make sure that we can communicate effectively with our local community and their residents. The thing with noise is it's so sensitive to the contours, the time of year, whether there's leaves on the trees or not. A cloudy day, a rainy day, it completely changes the way noise moves. So again, during a particular time of year, if we receive a large number of phone calls for a training activity that was similar to one we may have done a few months ago, we like to know how our actions are affecting the community.
Military activities on Camp Edwards, or the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve, was first conceived of in the late 90s, specifically 1990, between 1999 and 2001. Local, state, and federal representatives, most importantly the community, through the efforts of the Community Working Group, put together a framework and a set of standards for the oversight of military activities on this piece of property. Around 2002, that culminated in a state law, Chapter 47, the Acts of 2002, which in turn did several things. It formed the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve, the Camp Edwards training area, where we're at right now. It formed the Environmental Management Commission, which is made up of the 3 state environmental commissioners, Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Conservation and Recreation, and the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. With that, it formed 2 advisory councils to advise the commissioners. One is the Community Advisory Council, which has representatives from the 4 surrounding towns. It has 2 military representatives and 1 Coast Guard representative, and then several at-large members from across the Cape. The Science Advisory Council is made up of experts in the field of hydrology, geochemistry, chemistry, and wildlife habitat management. Those 2 councils, the military will bring any new training or training activity that they want to do on the reserve training area and bring it to the councils. The councils will then ask questions, do their due diligence, and then provide advice through the environmental officer to the Environmental Management Commission to make a decision. The Chapter 47 also formed an environmental officer who's here on Camp Edwards on a daily basis or as needed, sometimes even on the weekends, to ensure that military training is compatible and does not interfere with the environment. The sole purpose of the Upper Cape Water Supply and Camp Edwards training area is for water supply and water supply access, wildlife habitat protection, and compatible military training. That's the oversight process for Camp Edwards military activities here. EPS 19, which explicitly lays out the process for small arms range development on Camp Edwards in the EPSs, was the last EPS to be developed and was added after the law was created and the standards were put in place, because the Mass Guard returned to live fire in about 2008, and there was not a process for range development. So that standard was developed. The process for that, developing our small arms range here in EPS 19 is pretty straightforward. We need to involve the EMC, its 2 advisory councils, and specifically its EO in the design of range from the beginning to the end of the range. We go to the 2 advisory councils and let them, the Science Advisory Councils, and they generally want to know the chemistry of the action and the habitat impacts. So what kind of bullet are you using? For this current range, we're using a copper bullet. We still do have to monitor for lead, as in the primer of this round, there is some lead in that primer, so we do that monitoring. Capture the rounds, contain the rounds, recover the rounds, monitor, and then report, which is the most critical thing. So we've put in place a design, you can see here on this range, auxiliary burns that capture our projectiles. If we do see bullet-on-bullet impact, it's time to recover, which would be harvested and recycled. Then annually, we monitor soil and groundwater for any potential impacts from our actions on the range. Our focus right now is the Upper Cape Water Supply and the training area, and the timeline for this was The Mass Guard returned to live fire after a hiatus under EPA orders in 2008. That was with lead rounds into a bullet trap system. Once we moved to copper, we're moving away from the bullet trap systems and we're using a managed range. So in 2007, this proposed range was conceived of and knew that we needed. In 2012, it was identified as a critical requirement for Mass Guard soldiers to be able to call fire on their weapon systems. At that point in time, it was brought to the Environmental Management Commission and its two advisory councils and its environmental officer. We let them know that that was proposed. Along about 2015, it became a reality. Federal dollars were provided to develop this project here on Camp Edwards. 2018 was a specific meeting for the Science Advisory Council, Citizens Advisory Council, Community Advisory Council, and the Environmental Management Commission. The meeting was specifically on the range itself, the whole meeting itself. Every meeting that we do have with them, we give updates to. Also in 2015, selectmen briefings to the 4 surrounding towns surrounding the Camp Edwards training area, Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve, are given annual briefings, and the NPMG, or our qualification range here, was presented to the towns at that time frame. Our most recent meeting in regards to the NPMG was an update on July 29th of 2020, where we updated both advisory councils on our status of the range. So we had completed our MEPA process and we entered our environmental assessment process in the NEPA process, National Environmental Policy Act. So with that, we've had about 8 years of public involvement and agency coordination in the development of this project. So from the firing line through the end of the range, soils are monitored for metals again, and anything that may be present that can make metals mobile in soil. If we see any elevation in that or any trending up of anything that we're concerned with, it obviously is reported to the environmental officer at the commission and any regulatory authority that's we're required to present that to. We also monitor groundwater. We have several groundwater wells at each range that intercepts the groundwater that would percolate off the range so that we can look at the groundwater beneath the range. To date, both soil and groundwater have been in great healthy condition from our current firing activity since 2008. We've noticed no buildup of any constituents in the soil or groundwater that would be of concern. Matter of fact, most of it is at background or less than background levels of the constituents that we're concerned with. Of course, at the target burn where all the copper is landing, we have a little uptick in copper, but it is at very low levels and is communicated again when we get those results to the environmental officer who's charged with implementing the EPSs or oversight of the EPSs and enforcement of the environmental performance standards here at Camp Edward. It's been a great cooperative process. The information is available to the public. We post it on websites and at request.
The base is excellent. We have plenty of land, we're able to maneuver, we can have numerous units out here at the same time. The one limitation that I've run into is that if we want to train using crew serve weapons or machine guns, then we need to travel out of state.
If you have to travel, it takes away from the training. You have to travel, be away from your family, and it takes up so much time traveling, and you won't get that time training efficiently and whatever you have to do. Versus if all the training is done in Camp Edwards, you have more time.
On top of that, we also have the unit become segmented. We have portions of the unit typically other states. It's difficult right now to be able to actually meet all of these once you factor in the logistics of sending soldiers to other states with their weapons, trying to coordinate with those states in order to get range time, get those soldiers qualified, and at the same time being able to bring them back so we can train as an organic unit in order to meet our unit's missions.
It's important for the soldiers because that just means that less time they have to be away from their family. So let's say if you have to go 200 or 300 miles, that's just cutting into their personal time with their family.
If we had the multi-purpose machine gun range, what it would allow us to do is to have all of our soldiers here on one base, and they could go out, they could qualify on their primary weapon systems, and then we would immediately have them back with the units, and we could continue to qualify on the other tasks that our units have assigned to us.
The Massachusetts National Guard remains committed in our obligation to be a valuable community partner and steward to the environment on Camp Edwards, on Cape Cod, and throughout the Commonwealth. As you've heard during the years leading up to this renovation of the weapons range, we've consulted with environmental groups and agencies to minimize any impact on the environment. We're also putting in place programs to offset any impacts that we can't mitigate. Throughout the process, we've openly shared the details of the project with the public and sought out community partners to address any concerns. Many of the soldiers and airmen that will use this range live in the surrounding area and communities. They also share the same concerns. We've worked hard to make sure this project is in line with our values and our obligations. And at the end of the day, what this project is all about is providing these men and women the training they need to protect the homeland and to fight and win the nation's wars and then come home. These service members have served their communities during hurricanes, tornadoes, winter storms, the COVID-19 pandemic, and events throughout the Commonwealth. By giving these Massachusetts Guard members a place to train in their home state, they will then be able to spend those last few weeks and days before deployment going home to their family and not spending time traveling to training areas outside the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about this project. I'm excited to bring this valuable training to Massachusetts Guard members, and I look forward to continuing the conversation and positive partnerships we have with the communities of Cape Cod and throughout the Commonwealth.